When Rebecca Halloway drove her boy into the Vermont mountains that November, she had $340, one broken marriage behind her, and no better place to go. The job was simple: sweep the cabins, watch the pipes, stay through winter at a summer camp called Millbrook Ridge. The old man who hired her walked her down the path in the snow. He was kind. He was careful. He handed her a heavy ring of keys, and he pointed at a cabin set apart from the others, boards nailed over its windows. Then he said something Becca would think about every night for the next 3 weeks. "Whatever happens, Miss Halloway, do not open cabin 9. She asked why. He looked at the trees a long time before he answered. "A boy went missing there. Summer of 1974. He was 10 years old. They called it a runaway. Some stories are better left where they are." Becca said she understood. She meant it, but 16 nights later, a storm broke a pipe under that cabin, and her 5-year-old son handed her a small brass key he said a boy in a green sweater had told him to bring. And when Becca finally turned the lock and stepped inside, she found something a child had carved into the wood of a bunk 50 years ago. Her words cut deep. "I didn't run away. Stay with Becca tonight." Because sometimes the truth waits 50 years for the right person to open the door. The road into the Green Mountains that afternoon was the color of old iron. Snow moved sideways across the windshield. Not falling, traveling. Becca kept both hands on the wheel of the old Ford Escape and watched the yellow line disappear in front of her, then reappear, then disappear again. Vermont in late November did not welcome you. It let you pass through if you were careful, and it watched. In the back seat, her son slept. Oliver was 5 years old. He wore a green puffer coat 2 sizes too big, because Becca had bought it at a church sale in Albany, and the smaller sizes were gone. He held a small stuffed rabbit against his chest. His mouth was open. His eyelashes were long and dark, and when he slept like this, he looked exactly like the child she remembered from before everything came apart. She looked at him in the rearview mirror, and her throat went tight. $340. That was the number she kept saying inside her head, the way some people said the rosary. $340. A trunk full of the last things they owned. A used car with a slow leak in the rear tire. And a job offer from a man named Henry Coleman, who ran a summer camp she had found on an old maintenance forum at 2 in the morning. Winter caretaker. Free heat. Free electricity. A cottage. A bed for Oliver. That was all she needed. That was the whole prayer. At a diner outside Rutland, 2 hours back, she had ordered him a grilled cheese and a small chocolate milk. When the waitress asked what she wanted, Becca said she wasn't hungry. She said it with a smile. She smiled the way women learn to smile when they need the person across from them to believe them without asking questions. The waitress had looked at her for one long second. Then she brought the grilled cheese. Then she brought a second grilled cheese on the house and set it down in front of Becca without a word. Becca had cried in the bathroom of that diner for 4 minutes. Then she washed her face. Then she paid and tipped the waitress everything she had in singles and got back in the car. Because the world was not made only of people like Grant. There were also people like that waitress. Quiet, watching, willing to slide a sandwich across a table without needing to be thanked. Becca just had to remember how to see them again. She had once believed she had built a safe, ordinary life. Not fancy, not big. A 2-bedroom apartment in a town outside Albany. A husband who worked as a paralegal at a downtown firm. A refrigerator with Oliver's crayon drawings held on by magnets shaped like watermelon slices. Sunday grocery shopping. School mornings. Grant had never hit her. That was the sentence she would say to herself later when she was trying to understand what he had done to her. He never hit me. He never yelled. He never even raised his voice. He just told her every day that she was wrong. She had thrown out his brown shoes. No, honey. Those were in the closet. She had checked on Tuesday. She had asked him about the receipt from the hotel in Poughkeepsie. Sweetheart, that was work. I told you last month. You forgot again. She had heard him on the phone at 11 at night, in the garage, laughing softly the way a man laughs, when there is a woman on the other end. You were dreaming, Beck. You always dream about things like this. You always turn nothing into something. And she had believed him, because he was so calm, because he was so patient, because he would look at her, with his warm brown eyes, and say, "Honey, I'm worried about you. Have you been sleeping?" Until the morning she found the second phone. It was inside an old winter boot in the garage. She was not snooping. She had been looking for a pair of pliers. And there it was. Text messages. 2 years of them. Photographs. A woman named Chloe. Becca had sat on the concrete floor of the garage for 40 minutes, holding that phone in her lap, and the thing that hurt was not the woman. The thing that hurt was how many times she had asked. And how many times he had smiled and told her she was making it up. 2 years of being told her own eyes were lying to her. By the time she filed for divorce, she could not remember the last time she had trusted the sound of her own voice. The judge had been fair. He gave Grant visitation. He gave Becca custody. He gave her the small IRA that had been in her name. Grant kept the apartment. He kept the furniture. He kept his salary. He kept his job. Becca kept Oliver and a car with a slow leak in the rear tire. And she kept the voice in her head. The one that said, over and over, in Grant's voice, "You're imagining things. You always imagine things. Even now, even here, driving through the Green Mountains with a sleeping child, the voice was still there. You're imagining you can do this. You're imagining you can be enough." The sign for Camp Millbrook Ridge appeared just before sunset. Wooden, weather-beaten, carved with a pine tree, and the words EST 1948. Becca turned in. The gravel road climbed for a mile, through pines that touched, over the top of the car like the ribs of some large, sleeping animal. Then the trees opened. And there it was, 32 cabins. Small, log-sided, roofs heavy with snow. A big central lodge with a stone chimney and a wide, empty porch. A maintenance shed. A dock reaching out into a lake that was already going still along its edges, the way water does when it is preparing to become ice. Lake Loon. That was the name on the map. Because in summer, Henry had told her on the phone, the loons came here to nest, and their calls carried across the water at night like something out of an old story. There were no loons now. There was only the wind. Oliver stirred in the back seat. "Mom, I'm here, Bug. Where are we?" "We're at the camp. Remember? The camp I told you about." He sat up. He pressed his small palm against the window and looked at the empty cabins standing in the snow. "There's no kids. Not in winter, sweetheart. The kids come in summer." "Then who lives here?" Becca watched a light come on in the front window of the lodge. "Us," she said. "For now it's us." Henry Coleman was waiting on the porch. He was 60, maybe a little older. Tall the way men from that part of the country are tall, with wide shoulders that had been wider once, and a canvas jacket the color of pine bark. His beard was gray. His eyes were the pale blue of shallow ice. He came down the steps slowly. He took his cap off when he saw Becca get out of the car. "Miss Halloway, please." "Becca." He nodded once. "Henry." She turned and lifted Oliver out of the back seat. The boy clung to her neck and buried his face in her hair. Henry looked at the small dark head against her shoulder, and something in his face softened. "Boy's tired. He's been in the car since 6 this morning. There's soup on. My wife sent it up. She said you'd be hungry." Becca felt her eyes sting. She looked at the snow. "That's kind. Come on. I'll show you the place before it gets full dark." He walked them down a path between 2 long rows of cabins. Each cabin had a name painted above its door in white letters that had faded to gray. Chickadee, Loon, Otter, Beaver, Wren. Boys' cabins on one side of the path. Girls on the other. All of them shuttered. All of them silent. The caretaker cottage was at the far end, near the maintenance shed. It was small, 1 story, A tin roof with a stovepipe. A porch with 2 rocking chairs and a green bench and a shovel leaning against the wall. Inside, 1 bedroom. 1 small kitchen. A wood stove. A propane heater that rattled when Henry turned it on. Faded blue curtains in every window. It was not much. It was warm. Oliver walked into the little bedroom and set his rabbit on the pillow of the twin bed by the window. He walked back out. He walked back in. He walked back out. Becca watched him. Bug, what are you doing? Looking. What are you looking at? Which one is my bed? Henry glanced at her, because he understood the question, even if she did not want him to. Becca knelt down. She smoothed Oliver's hair. Both beds are yours, honey. You can sleep in either one. Oliver thought about it very seriously. I want the one by the window. Okay. Are we going to stay here for a long time? She swallowed. Until spring, buddy. Oliver looked at the boxes stacked by the door. So we don't have to pack them for a while. Becca felt something inside her chest go tight and small and hot. Because it had not occurred to her, until that moment, that Oliver had been counting. That her 5-year-old had been keeping a small quiet ledger, in his head, of how long between each move. No, sweetheart. Not for a while. Henry Coleman looked politely at the ceiling and said nothing at all. When Oliver was busy setting the rabbit up on the pillow just so, Henry took Becca down to the maintenance shed and showed her the generator. The furnace, the main water shutoff, the rotary phone that still worked when the cell towers went out, which he said would happen more than she liked. He walked her to the lodge. He showed her the pantry, the keys to the pantry. Then he took her last to the edge of camp, where a single cabin stood by itself, set back from the others. 20 yards further into the pines. Different somehow in a way she could not immediately name. And then she saw it. The windows were boarded, not shuttered, boarded. Long planks of plywood nailed straight across the frames. Weather gray, with the nail heads dark and rusted. The door was locked with 2 padlocks. One old, one new. There was no name above the door. Only a number. 9. Henry stopped 10 feet from the porch. That one, he said. That's the one I want to talk to you about. Becca waited. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the cabin. You'll do a walk through of the grounds every morning. Roofs, pipes, windows, the pump house, the dock. If a tree comes down, you tell me. If a raccoon gets into the pantry, you tell me. Understood. Except for that one. He nodded at the cabin. You don't go in there. You don't try the locks. You don't look through the boards. You don't even walk up on the porch if you can help it. Okay. I mean it, Miss Halloway. I hear you. He turned to her then, and his pale eyes were tired the way a man's eyes get tired when he has been carrying something for a long time. A boy went missing from that cabin. Summer of 1974. He was 10 years old. His name was Simon Whitaker. Becca did not speak. They called it a runaway. They searched the woods. They searched the lake. They never found him. And they just locked the cabin. They locked it. Nobody wanted to sleep in it after that. Then a few years passed. Then 20. Then 30. Nobody wanted to open it either. It's just been sitting there. Some stories are better left where they are. The wind moved in the pines above them. Becca looked at the boarded windows, at the 2 padlocks, at the way the snow had drifted up against the porch, and no one had shoveled it because no one ever walked there. She thought of the way Grant used to say certain sentences. Some things are better not talked about, Beck. You're going to make yourself sick if you keep digging. Some stories are better left where they are. The 2 sentences were cousins. She could hear it, but she was tired, and she needed this job. And she was standing in front of an old man in a canvas jacket who was doing her a kindness by hiring her at all. So she said, I understand. I won't touch it. Henry looked at her one more second. Then he nodded. Good. He walked her back to the cottage. He shook her hand. He told her the generator would kick on automatic if the grid went out, and there was a rotary phone in the maintenance shed if the cell towers dropped, and there was a maintenance alarm in the kitchen that would beep if anything went wrong with the pipes. Beep how? Loud. Trust me. You won't sleep through it. Okay. He touched the brim of his cap. He looked once, past her at cabin 9. Then he got in his truck and drove down the mountain, and the taillights disappeared into the trees. Becca locked the cottage door behind her. Then she checked it. Then she checked it again. Oliver was already on the floor of the little bedroom. He had opened the box of books. He was placing them one at a time on the low wooden shelf under the window. The Snowy Day, Frog and Toad, All at Home, Where the Wild Things Are. She watched him from the doorway. He was not asking her when they were going to pack them back up. He was putting them on the shelf. She stood there for a long time, because for months she had watched him put things into boxes. And tonight, for the first time, he was taking them out. It was such a small thing. It was such a small thing that meant everything. She let herself believe for one moment that maybe they could be all right. Then she looked out the kitchen window, and past the black trunks of the pines, at the edge of the darkening trees, she could see the shape of cabin 9. The boarded windows, the 2 padlocks, the story that had been sitting there for 50 years, waiting. The first 12 days were quiet. Becca made a schedule and she stuck to it because a schedule was a kind of scaffolding, and scaffolding held you up when you did not yet have walls. Mornings she checked the furnace. She checked the propane. She walked the main path in her boots from the lodge down to the dock and back up along the cabin row, and she made a small mark in her notebook next to each cabin as she passed. Chickadee. Fine. Loon. Fine. Otter. Fine. Cabin 9 she did not mark. She only glanced at it and looked away. Oliver did school online at the kitchen table. He had a workbook. He had a video call 3 days a week with a kindergarten teacher named Miss Alma in Albany, who wore a different pair of earrings every day, and who never asked why Oliver was in Vermont now instead of at school. Which was a kindness Becca did not know how to repay. In the afternoons, when the weather allowed, they walked down to Lake Loon. The ice was spreading a little further each day. First just along the shore, then out in a thin gray shelf, then further until you could see where the black water still moved, out in the middle, and where the ice had begun to lock it in. Oliver liked to throw pebbles onto the ice and watch them skid. Mom! Yeah! Do the fish sleep under the ice? They slow down. Their bodies get real slow because the water is so cold. Kind of like sleeping. Do they know we're up here? Becca thought about it. I don't know, Buggy. I think maybe they know something is up here. They can feel our footsteps a little bit, through the ice. Oliver considered this. I hope they don't get scared. She looked at him, standing in his too big green coat on the edge of a frozen lake in Vermont, worrying about whether the fish were scared of him. She thought, in that moment, I made this child. All those years I thought I was crazy, I made this child. And he is soft in a world that will try to make him hard. And I have to keep him soft. They're not scared, she said. They can tell we're friendly. How can they tell? Because we're not the kind of people who scare fish. Oliver nodded, satisfied, and threw another pebble. Little by little, Millbrook Ridge began to feel less like a place they had escaped to. It began to feel like a place where they lived. She almost stopped thinking about cabin 9. Almost. Sometimes at night, when the wind moved a certain way, she would stand at the kitchen sink washing a plate, and she would look up, and there it would be, set back in the pines, the 2 padlocks, the boarded windows, and she would think, what were you afraid people would see, Henry? And then she would put the plate in the drying rack and turn off the light. On the 13th day, Oliver came in from playing on the porch and said something that made her heart stop for one full second. Mom! Yeah, Bug. I made a friend. She was at the sink. She turned the water off. Oh yeah. His name is Sam. She turned around. Where did you meet him? Outside. He was by the cabin with the boards. Becca did not move. She looked at her son. He was standing in the doorway of the cottage in his little green coat, his cheeks pink from the cold, his rabbit under one arm. Oliver. Who was outside? A boy. He had a green sweater. Not like mine, like the old kind, with patterns on it. like Grandma's Christmas sweaters. How old was he? 10. He told me he was 10. Becca's hand was still on the faucet. She said carefully, "Was there anyone else out there? Like a grown-up?" "No. Just him." "And what did he want, honey?" "He wanted to play." Becca crossed the kitchen. She knelt down. She put her hands on Oliver's small shoulders, and she looked at him, and she made her voice as calm as she could. "Buggy, listen to me. This is important. Nobody else lives here right now. Just you and me and Henry comes and goes. Are you sure you saw a boy?" Oliver looked at her. His forehead did that little wrinkle it did when he was trying to be careful with what he said. "Yes. Okay. He was there. Promise." "Okay, Buggy. I believe you." But she was thinking, because she had to be thinking, because there were no other children at this camp in November, and she had not heard a car, and there was no lodge, no other cottage, no summer family, no. Then Oliver said the thing. He said, "Mom." He told me not to say anything, because he said you would think I was lying. Becca stopped breathing, because that was Grant. That was Grant's voice, coming out of her 5-year-old son's mouth. That was what Grant had said 100 times in the last 3 years of their marriage. "Your mom doesn't listen. Your mom thinks people lie. Your mom is a little bit crazy, buddy. Don't tell her the small stuff. She'll turn it into a big deal." Except this time it was not Grant saying it. This time it was a boy in a green sweater who had told her son the same thing. She pulled Oliver into her arms. Hard. She held the back of his little head. She could feel the cold of the outdoors still on his coat, and the warmth of him underneath. "Buggy. Mom. You listen to me right now. Are you listening?" "Yeah. I believe you." He pulled back a little to look at her. "You do." "Ido. I don't understand what happened out there, and I don't have to understand it. But I believe you saw what you saw." "Mom." "Yeah, Bug. You never said that before." She thought her heart was going to break in half. Right there, on the linoleum floor of a caretaker's cottage in Vermont. "I know I didn't, honey. I'm going to say it more from now on." She held him for a long time. Later, after she had put him in the bath, after she had heated soup and buttered bread and read Owl at Home twice, after he was asleep with the rabbit tucked under his chin, Becca put on her boots and her coat. She took the flashlight. She went out. The snow had settled. The wind had stopped. The camp was very quiet, the way it gets quiet after a fresh fall when even the pines are holding still. She walked to cabin 9. She stood at the tree line, where Oliver had said the boy had been standing, and she shone the flashlight down at the ground. She was looking for footprints. An adult's footprints. A stranger's. Something that would tell her a real living human had been out here today. Somebody's lost hunter. Some hiker who had wandered off the ridge trail and befriended a child through the trees and then gone away. She wanted badly to find those footprints, because if she found them, she could call Henry, and Henry could call the sheriff. And there would be an explanation. A real, solid, adult explanation with a name and a driver's license. She swept the flashlight across the snow. There were only Oliver's boot prints. One small child, walking out alone from the cottage. Walking around the base of cabin 9. Circling. Stopping. Circling. Standing still for a while. And then walking back to the cottage. No adult prints. No second child. No Haike. Nothing at all. Becca stood in the snow for a long time. She looked at the boarded windows of cabin 9. She looked at the 2 padlocks. And she thought very softly, in the quiet inside her chest, "I believe him. Even if there are no footprints. I believe my son." She went back to the cottage. She locked the door. Then she checked it. Then she checked it again. The storm came in on Thursday. It started just before dark, the way the good ones do in Vermont. A fine dry snow that looked almost polite. Then heavier. Then the wind picked up and began to move through the pines in long, restless waves, and by 10 o'clock the world had disappeared, and there was only white outside the kitchen window, and the shape of the porch railing under a foot of snow. Becca had tucked Oliver in an hour before. He had asked for 2 chapters of Frog and Toad instead of 1. She had given him 3. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a stack of Henry's maintenance receipts when the alarm went off. It was loud. Henry had not exaggerated. A single flat electronic beep, then a red light on the panel next to the fridge. Low pressure. North line. Becca stood up. She walked to the panel. She read it again. Low pressure. North line. The north line was every cabin, from the lodge out to the far edge of camp, which meant a pipe, which meant something had frozen, or something had broken, and if she left it until morning, the damage could spread down the whole system, and the whole camp would drink water like a punctured lung all through spring. Henry had shown her what to do. Find the leak. Turn the local shutoff. Get in, get out, call in the morning. She pulled on her boots. Her coat. Hia vulhat. She checked on Oliver. He was sleeping the deep, milk-soft sleep of a 5-year-old, with the rabbit pinned under one arm. She closed his door quietly and stepped outside. The wind hit her like a wall. Because the storm had turned mean. Snow moved sideways in ropes. The beam of her flashlight only reached 6 feet in front of her, before it disappeared. Her boots sank up to the shin. She followed the path she walked every morning. Chickadee. She swept the flashlight along the foundation. Dry. Loon. Dry. Otter. Dry. Beaver. Dry. She kept going. She could hear her own breath loud inside her hood. Wren. Dry. And then she came around the bend, and the flashlight caught something moving on the ground. Water. Dark water. Spreading in a thin fan across the snow. Already turning to ice at its edges. Running out from under the floor of the next building down. Becca lifted the flashlight. The beam climbed the porch steps. Climbed the boarded windows. Stopped on the door. On the 2 padlocks. On the number 9. She stood in the snow with the wind coming through her coat, and she said, out loud to nothing, "No, no, not this one, anyone but this one." But the water kept running. She could hear it now under the wind. A steady rush inside the walls of the cabin. A shuddering knock, as something under the floorboards flexed and let go. She grabbed her phone out of her pocket. No bars. No signal at all. She turned and ran, half stumbling in the drifts, back to the maintenance shed. She unlocked the door. She grabbed the receiver of the old rotary phone. She spun the 0. Static. She spun it again. Static. She slammed the receiver down and stood in the shed breathing hard. She thought, Henry said not to go in. She thought, Henry said the north line could take out the whole camp if I don't stop it. She thought, $340 in my checking account. She thought, Oliver, sleeping under a wool blanket in a cottage, that will freeze if the pipes go. She thought, not again. She whispered it out loud, because sometimes you had to hear yourself say it. Not again. She went back out into the storm. She tried every key on the ring Henry had given her. There were 42 keys on that ring. She tried them all. In the upper padlock, then the lower padlock, then back to the upper padlock in case she had misjudged one. Her hands were shaking, so hard by the 10th key she could barely fit the metal into the slot. None of them fit. Not one. She was on her knees in front of cabin 9 in a foot of snow, in the middle of a Vermont storm, with a flashlight in her mouth and a fistful of useless keys, when she heard the voice behind her. Mom! She spun around. Oliver was standing 10 yards back, in his snow boots, in his pajamas, with her old red parka thrown over the top of him and dragging in the drifts. She was on her feet before she knew she had stood up. Oliver, what are you doing out here? I came to help. You never come outside alone at night. Do you understand me? Never. Mom, that is a rule. That is one of the biggest rules we have. Mom, you forgot your phone. He held it out to her in his small mittened hand. She took it, and then she saw that his other hand was closed around something else. What's that in your other hand, Buggy? He opened his fingers. A small brass key, old, darkened, the teeth worn down soft with time. Becca stared at it in the beam of the flashlight. Where did you get this? It was taped to the back of the drawer. In the kitchen. The one with the batteries. Which drawer? The one under the toaster. She had opened that drawer 20 times in 12 days. She had never once thought to look underneath it. Who told you to look there, honey? Oliver looked at her. He did not want to say it. She knelt down in the snow. Buggy. Who told you? Sam did. The wind moved through the pines above them. Sam. The boy from the other day. Yeah. He was there? Just now? In the cottage? Oliver shook his head. No. I heard him in my head. Like when you remember something. He said the key was there. He said you needed it. Under the floor of cabin 9, another pipe let go with a low, hollow bang. Becca looked at the key in her son's palm. She looked at her son. She looked at the padlocks. Then she took the key from his hand. She slid it into the upper lock. Turned like it had been used the day before. She unlocked the second padlock the same way. She stood up. She told Oliver to wait on the porch and not to move. She pushed the door. It opened inward with a low, cold sigh. Air moved past her out into the storm. Old air. Stale air. Air that had been sitting inside a room for 50 years, without anyone breathing it. Becca stepped inside. Her flashlight moved across a room that time had forgotten. 2 long rows of bunk beds. Wooden. Simple. Made up with wool blankets folded neatly at the foot of each mattress, the way children were taught to fold them at the end of a summer session, before their parents came to pick them up. Camp pennants tacked to the log walls. Millbrook Ridge.
1974, Camp Champion.
A dusty shelf with a stack of comic books. The Fantastic Four. Archie. Sergeant Rock. A small pair of leather boys' sandals under one bunk, set together neatly, as though someone had just kicked them off. It was not a storage cabin. It was a summer that had never ended. She found the shutoff valve near the back wall, under the floor register. She got down on her knees. She turned it hard against the pressure. She turned it again. The rushing water under the floorboards slowed. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was so complete she could hear her own heart. She should have left then. She knew she should have. But her flashlight, when she stood back up, moved across the last bunk in the row. And she saw it. Letters carved into the pine of the frame. Deep, careful. She stepped closer. She reached out and brushed the dust away with her glove.
Simon W. 1974.
Below the name cut deeper still for words. I didn't run away. Becca stood there in the beam of her own flashlight. She could hear Oliver's small breathing on the porch behind her. She could hear the wind outside. She could hear, for the first time in a long time, her own thoughts, clear and unmuddied, and her own. She thought, 50 years. 50 years this little boy had been calling out, from inside these 4 walls. And nobody had heard him. She was still looking at the words, when her right boot shifted under her. The floorboard moved. Not much. Just an inch. Just enough that she looked down. The nail heads on the board were loose. Somebody had pried this board up before. A long time ago, and then set it back down but not driven the nails home. Becca crouched. She got her fingers under the edge of the board. She lifted. Underneath, in the narrow space between the floor joists, was a rusted tin box. Old, brown at the corners, about the size of a shoebox. She reached in. She lifted it out. She set it on the floor of cabin 9 in front of her, in the small circle of her flashlight, and she opened the lid. Inside, a bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue string. Inside, a small stack of Polaroid photographs. Inside, a metal camp badge that said Millbrook Ridge, Staff, 1974. Inside, a small brass compass. She picked up the compass. She turned it over. On the back, scratched into the metal by a child's hand, were 2 initials. S. V. And underneath the initials, for words. Careful. Slow. Cut with the point of a nail, maybe, or the tip of a pocket knife. Find your way home. Becca closed her fingers around it. The metal was cold, and it was small. and it fit inside her palm the way a small thing fits into a woman's hand, the way her son's hand fit inside hers when she walked him across a parking lot. Behind her, from the porch, Oliver's voice came very softly. "Mom!" She did not turn around. "Yeah, Bug. Who's Sam?" Becca looked down at the tin box on the floor of cabin 9, at the letters, at the badge, at the Polaroids. She picked up the top Polaroid. Faded, the corners bent, the color washed to pale yellow and pale green. A boy in a green sweater, standing on the shore of Lake Loon. Thin, serious, dark eyes, both hands cupped around a small brass compass. Behind him, maybe 30 yards away at the tree line, an adult man was standing, watching. His face was blurred by distance and by the cheap old camera lens. But his jacket was not blurred at all. His jacket was clear, red, and black, a wool hunting coat. Becca stared at the photograph. Oliver's voice, very small, from the porch. "Mom!" "Yeah, Buggy. That's him." She turned her head. Her son was standing just inside the doorway of cabin 9 now. He had come in out of the wind. He was pointing at the photograph in her hand. "That's Sam. The boy in the green sweater. That's who I played with." Becca looked at the child in the Polaroid. Then at her son. Then at the child in the Polaroid. And the man behind him, Buggy. The man in the red coat. Oliver looked at the picture. Oliver's face changed. "I saw him too." She went very still. "Where?" "Down by the lake. Last week. When I was looking at the ice." The wind moved through the pines outside. Somewhere out over Lake Loon, a piece of the new ice cracked, with a long, low sound that carried all the way up the slope. Becca looked at the boy in the photograph. The green sweater, the brass compass in his cupped hands, the 4 words carved on the back of the compass in her palm. "Find your way home." She looked at her son. She looked past him, out through the open door of cabin 9, out through the storm, out toward the trees at the edge of the frozen lake, where a man in a red and black coat had once stood watching a 10-year-old boy 50 years ago, and where apparently someone was standing again. She closed her hand around the compass. She stood up. She reached out with her other hand and pulled her son gently against her hip. And in the silence of cabin 9, in the beam of her own flashlight, in the middle of a Vermont storm on a mountain nobody was watching, Becca Halloway understood something, with the whole of her body. Cabin 9 had not been locked to keep people out. Cabin 9 had been locked to keep Simon Whitaker's story in. And whoever had done that 50 years ago, whoever had wanted this door to stay shut, was not finished. Becca did not sleep that night. She put Oliver back in his bed. She sat on the edge of it, until his breathing went long and slow. She kissed the crown of his head, where his hair still smelled like the drugstore shampoo she had been rationing for a month. Then she went into the kitchen. She set the tin box on the table under the yellow light above the stove. She put the brass compass beside it. She put the small stack of Polaroids beside the compass. She put the bundle of letters, tied with the blue string, beside the Polaroids. Then she sat down across, from all of it, like a woman sitting across, from an old friend she had not seen in 50 years, and did not know how to greet. Outside, the storm kept moving. Snow packed against the kitchen window. The propane heater rattled on. Then it rattled off. Then the silence, after, was so deep she could hear the wood in the walls contract, with the cold. She looked at the compass. S.W. Find your way home. She turned it over. She turned it over again. She kept doing that, because her hands needed something to do, while her head did the harder work. She thought, 50 years. She thought, a 10-year-old. She thought, somebody hid this here on purpose. And then, quieter underneath all of that, she thought the thing she had been trying not to think. She thought, the man in the red coat is not 50 years dead, because Oliver had seen him at the lake last week, which was not possible, so she made herself say it out loud. Oliver saw a man in a red coat by the lake last week. Her voice sounded very small in the kitchen, but it sounded like her voice, And Simon Whitaker had his picture taken in 1974, with a man in a red coat standing behind him. She set the compass down. And I don't know what that means yet, but it is not nothing. She untied the blue string on the letters. She hesitated, because she had the uncomfortable feeling that she was stepping into somebody else's grief without being invited. But then, Cabin 9 had been locked for 50 years, and a boy had carved for words into a bunk frame, as though he was afraid nobody would ever remember them. I didn't run away. She untied the string. The letters were not really letters. They were pages torn from a spiral notebook. Some of them dated, some of them not, all of them in the same careful young handwriting, slanted a little to the right, with the loops in the G, and the Y drawn round the way girls used to draw them in the 70s. The name at the bottom of the first one made her sit up straighter. The first page was dated July 8, 1974. Simon came to me again after dinner. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat on the dock with me and watched the light on the water. Then he asked me if kids ever got to choose where they lived. I said sometimes. He said not most times. I said no, honey, not most times. He looked at me like he was going to say more, but he didn't. He went back up to cabin 9. Becca put the page down. She looked toward the bedroom where Oliver was sleeping. Kids ever got to choose where they lived. She thought about the way her son had walked into that little bedroom 5 hours ago, and asked her which one was his bed. Because he had been keeping a ledger. She read the next page. July 14th. He's not making trouble. I wish people would stop saying that. He is quiet. There is a difference between a bad child and a scared child, and nobody at this camp seems to want to learn it. Bad children shove other kids. Bad children steal from the canteen. Simon doesn't do any of that. Simon just watches the tree lean like something is coming for him. And nobody except me seems to notice. Becca read that page twice. Then a third time. There is a difference between a bad child and a scared child. She could hear it in her chest. Like a bell. By 4 in the morning, she had read almost every page. Piece by piece, Simon Whitaker came together on the kitchen table. He was 10. He was small for his age. He was allergic to blueberries. He hated swimming in the deep end of the lake because he could not see his own feet. He collected smooth stones from the shore and kept them in a coffee tin under his bunk. He wrote his mother once a week, but she almost never wrote back. He saved half his dessert every night, according to R.E., because he was never quite convinced that there would be food tomorrow. His father was a minister in a small town called West Hollow. His father was a strict man. R.E. did not say more than that, but there was one page, dated July 19th, where the pen had pressed hard into the paper. I saw the marks on his back today when he was changing into his swim trunks. He did not know I saw. He turned around fast and pulled his shirt back down. I did not say anything because he did not want me to. But I saw them and I know what they are. And I know what will happen if he goes home in 3 weeks. Becca closed her eyes. She sat at the kitchen table in a cottage in Vermont, and she sat with a 10-year-old boy she had never met, who had died before she was born, and she felt his fear, so clearly it was almost her own. Then she opened her eyes, and she kept reading. The last 3 pages were different. The handwriting on them was faster. Messier, as though R.E. had been writing standing up. July 20th. I've made up my mind. I can't send him back there. I have a friend in New Hampshire. Pastor. Not like his father. A good one. He and his wife will take Simon in for the rest of the summer, while we figure this out. If I tell the director, he'll make me put Simon on the bus home. So I am not telling the director. July 21st. Tomorrow night. Bus leaves at 4:30 in the morning. From Loon Lake Station. I got him the ticket. Boston, then transfer to Manchester. I gave him $7 and the address. He is going to meet me at the boathouse at 3. I am going to walk him to the road myself. I keep thinking, what if I am wrong? What if this ruins his life? What if his father comes looking? And then I think, he is 10. and he has marks on his back. And I don't get to be wrong about that. If anybody finds these pages, before I burn them, please, please, do not send him home. Becca sat with those pages for a long time. She thought, R.E. She thought, whoever you were. She thought, you were 19 years old. She thought, God bless you, whoever you were. Then she picked up the Polaroids. Most of them were ordinary. Kids in canoes. Kids at picnic tables. A boy's cabin lined up on the porch of Loon cabin holding fish they had caught. A young man with sideburns pointing at something off camera. A row of counselors in matching Millbrook Ridge t-shirts sitting on the steps of the lodge. She looked at every face. She was looking for R.E. She thought she found her. Second row, third from the left. A young woman with dark hair pulled back in a bandana. Round face. Small. Serious. About 19. Becca tapped the face with her fingertip. Hi, she said quietly. Thank you for trying. Then she found the picture that mattered. Simon at the lake. Green sweater. Brass compass in his cupped hands. And behind him, at the tree line, the man in the red and black coat. She held the flashlight up to it. She squinted. The face was still blurred. But she could see now, up close, what she had missed before. The man's hands. He was holding a clipboard. He was watching Simon the way an adult watches a child, who is not entirely his, but who is his responsibility. He was watching him the way a director watches a camper. Becca sat back in her chair. She said to nobody, Henry, who ran this camp in 1974. The wind came up hard against the kitchen window and answered her in its own way. Nothing. Oliver was in the doorway. Becca did not know how long he had been there. He was standing in his pajamas, rubbing one eye with a small closed fist, dragging his rabbit by one ear. Buggy. Couldn't sleep. Come here. He climbed into the chair across from her and sat, with his knees up under his chin, and looked at everything on the table, with the perfect solemn seriousness of a 5-year-old, who understood he was in the presence of something important. Are those Sam's things? I think so, honey. He didn't tell me about the pictures. Becca smiled a small, sad smile at that, because of course he hadn't. Oliver reached across the table with one finger. He touched the edge of the Polaroid, the one with the boy in the green sweater and the man in the red coat. Mom. Yeah, Bug. That's the man. I know, honey, you said. No. That's the man from Sunday. The man at the lake. She looked at him. You told me. You saw him last week. Not last week. He looked up at her. His eyes were huge and dark and completely sure. I saw him yesterday too. Becca's stomach dropped. Yesterday. Which was during the storm. Which was during the day, when they had been shut in together watching the snow. Buggy. When yesterday. When you were in the bathroom. And where was he? Standing by the maintenance shed. Just standing. Standing how? Standing looking at our house. Becca stood up so fast the chair scraped. She crossed the kitchen. She crossed the little living room. She checked the front door. Locked. She checked the back door. Locked. She checked the 2 windows in the kitchen. Locked. She checked the window over the couch. Locked. She checked the window in the bedroom, past Oliver's little bed, where her son had been sleeping earlier. Locked. She stood in the middle of the cottage, with her arms wrapped around herself, and she made herself breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She thought, you are okay. You are okay. Oliver is okay. Then she went back to the kitchen table, and she sat back down across from her son. Buggy. Yeah. That man. Was he tall or short? Tall. Old or young? Oliver frowned. He was thinking. He was trying to be a good witness. Old like Henry old. Or older. Was he moving? No. He was just standing. Did he see you? Oliver nodded. Becca went very still. He looked at me through the window, her son said. And he put his finger up like this. He raised one small finger and pressed it to his lips. Shoo. Becca did not cry. because she had cried enough in her life. Because she was 32 years old, and she was tired of crying about men who put their fingers to their lips and told women and children to be quiet. But something in her went hard and clear and cold, and it stayed that way. She stood up. She kissed the top of Oliver's head. She said, "Buggy, from now on, if you see anything, you come get me right away. Even if I am on the phone, even if I am in the shower, even if I look busy, you come get me. Okay, and I will believe you." Oliver nodded once. I know. That was the sentence, more than any other, that broke her. I know. He already knew. He already believed she would believe him. After one afternoon of her getting it right, her 5-year-old already knew. She thought about all the years she had needed one person to say that to her. She thought about how easy it had been to say it to him. She thought, no, you do not get to shush children on my watch. Not anymore. Not on my watch. The storm broke by sunrise. The sky went from black to gray to a pale, wintered blue. Snow lay across the camp in long, soft drifts. The pines had cast off their loads in the night and stood black and clean against the light. Becca poured Oliver a bowl of oatmeal. She waited until he was busy, with his tablet in the little living room, headphones on, doing his morning phonics lesson with Miss Alma. Then she opened her phone. 1 bar. She typed into the search box, carefully, Millbrook Ridge, Vermont, boy missing 1974. She held her breath. The first result was an archived newspaper page from the Rutland County Gazette. She tapped it. The photograph loaded first. Black and white. A school picture of a boy with a bowl haircut and a serious mouth. She recognized him at once. The same eyes. The same set of the shoulders. The same solemn little face she had been staring at in a Polaroid for 6 hours. Simon Whitaker. The headline underneath read, 10-year-old camper missing. From Millbrook Ridge. Runaway suspected. She scrolled. Simon had been reported missing the morning of July 23, 1974. Camp officials said he had left his cabin during the night. Search parties from 3 counties combed the woods for 8 days. Divers dragged the northern half of Lake Loon. Dogs followed his scent as far as the county road, then lost it. His father, Pastor David Whitaker of West Hollow, was quoted at the bottom of the article. The boy was troubled. He had a history of wandering. We will pray for his safe return. Becca stopped scrolling. She read that sentence 3 times. The boy was troubled. He had a history of wandering. Not, my 10-year-old is missing. Not, please help. Not, my son. The boy was troubled. She looked at her own son through the doorway, sitting on the rag rug in the living room in his pajamas, doing letter sounds with Miss Alma, feet tucked underneath him. She thought, I don't know you, Pastor David Whitaker, but I know that sentence. And I know what a man sounds like when he is already writing his son out of the story. She kept scrolling. 2 weeks later, a follow-up article. Same paper. By then Simon was already being described differently. Withdrawn. Solitary. Known to isolate himself from his peers. 2 weeks. And a scared 10-year-old had become, in newsprint, a strange one. She thought of R.E. Bad children shove other kids. Simon doesn't do any of that. Then she scrolled further. And she found the photograph she had been half expecting. A staff photo, taken outside the main lodge on the 3rd day of the search. Camp employees, sheriff's deputies, volunteers. She zoomed in. She scanned the faces. There, 2nd row. On the right, the man in the red and black hunting coat. The photograph was clearer than the Polaroid, which made sense. The Polaroid had been snapped from 30 yards away. This one had been staged for the paper. Broad shoulders, dark hair, square jaw, serious mouth, sunglasses tucked into the collar of his coat. Becca looked at the caption. The names were listed left to right, row by row. Front row, Sheriff G. Whitcomb, Deputy R. Aldrich, Deputy P. Voss. 2nd row, A. Coleman, Maintenance. H. Marsh Kitchen, R. Kilburn, camp director. R. Ellison, camper counselor. E. Marsh, kitchen. W. Barnes, groundskeeper. Becca stopped at the third name. R. Kilburn, camp director. She looked back at the man in the red coat. That was him. Standing in the second row, arms crossed, that clipboard tucked under one elbow. Robert Kilburn, the camp director. The man Simon had gone to for help, in a way, without ever getting to ask. The man who ran this place in the summer of 1974. Becca looked at the name to his left. Coleman, maintenance. She sat back in her chair. Coleman. The same last name as the man who had walked her down the path 3 weeks ago and told her some stories were better left where they were. She checked the date on the photograph. July 26, 1974. Which meant that the day the Gazette took this staff picture, Henry Coleman was a boy. Because Henry was 60 now. Which put him at 10 years old in 1974. Which meant the A. Coleman in this photograph was not Henry. It was Henry's father. Becca stared at the screen. The A. Coleman in the second row was not wearing a red coat. He was wearing a plain gray canvas work jacket, and his hands were pushed deep into the pockets, and he was not looking at the camera. He was looking, in fact, at the ground. There was something about the way he was standing. Something small. Something bent. Something that could have been shame. Or grief. Or both. Then her phone rang. She jumped so hard she almost dropped it. The screen said Henry Coleman. She looked at Oliver in the living room. She looked at the tin box on the kitchen table. She looked at the compass, the Polaroids, the bundle of letters tied with the blue string. She swiped. Henry. Morning, Miss Halloway. Storm treat you all right? We're fine. Any damage? She paused. She had two choices. She could lie. She could buy herself another day. Or she could tell the truth. Because she was Becca Halloway. And she was done. We had a pipe break. Where? North Line. There was a pause. Not long. But not nothing. Miss Halloway. Yes. You didn't go inside cabin 9. Did you? She did not answer. The silence stretched. When Henry spoke again, his voice was different. Quieter. Older. What did you find? Becca looked at the tin box. I found, she said carefully, a lot of things I would like to talk to you about in person. I'll be up in an hour. Henry. Yes. Who is Robert Kilburn? The pause on the other end of the line went on so long she thought the call had dropped. Then Henry said, I'll be up in an hour. And he hung up. Henry arrived a little after noon. He looked older than he had 3 weeks ago. That was the first thing she noticed. Something in his face had gone very tired. He took his boots off at the door. He set his cap on the counter. He looked once at Oliver, who was on the rug now with a coloring book, and Oliver looked up and waved, and Henry gave the boy a small, real smile. Then he sat at the kitchen table across from Becca. She had laid it out. The compass, the Polaroids, the letters, retied with the blue string, the archived newspaper page pulled up on her laptop. Henry looked at the compass first. He picked it up. He turned it over. He read the 4 words on the back, and his lips moved with them, but he did not say them out loud. Then he set it down, carefully, like a thing that could break. You want coffee, Henry? Please. She poured 2 mugs. She sat down. She turned the laptop toward him and tapped the staff photograph on the screen. Is this your father? Henry looked at the photograph a long time. Yes. His name was Arthur. Arthur Coleman. Yes. Tell me about him. Henry breathed in. He looked at his hands. He said, My father worked maintenance at Millbrook Ridge from 1969 to 1978. 9 summers. He was 32 years old the summer Simon Whitaker disappeared. I was 10. 10, Becca said. 10. Same age as the boy. I remember it. I remember the sheriff cars coming up the road. I remember the divers. I remember the way my mother made my father a sandwich every night, that whole first week, because he wouldn't come inside for supper. He paused. He wasn't the same after that summer. How? Quieter. He was already a quiet man. He got quieter. He drank a little on Sundays, which he never had before. He used to sit out on the porch of our house down the road, in his chair, looking up the mountain in the direction of the camp. Just sitting. Becca waited. Henry looked at his coffee. 2 weeks before he died. 1999. Lung cancer. He was in and out for days. But he had a clear afternoon. He asked me to sit with him. And he said one thing to me. He said, "There are things about that summer that the sheriff never heard, Henry. And I have been quiet about them my whole life. And I am sorry." Becca did not move. What did he mean, Henry? I don't know. He wouldn't say more. He wanted to. I could see he wanted to. But he couldn't. He couldn't. He was scared. The words sat between them on the kitchen table like a small hot stone. She said softly, "Henry, who was he scared of?" Henry looked up at her. His pale ice eyes were wet. He said, "Robert Kilburn is still alive." Becca went cold. "He's what?" "He's 84. He lives in a nursing home, Ridge Manor, about 40 minutes down the mountain. He never left this county after he retired. He shows up every year, first snow, and rides through here in his son's truck. Slow, windows up, just looking. Then he goes home. My father told me before he died, don't ever let that man near this camp when you're running it. I never asked why. I thought I understood." He set his hands flat on the table. "But maybe I never really understood. Until you opened that door." Becca looked at the tin box. She thought, 50 years. She thought, a man in a red coat has been driving up here every year for half a century to look at his own quiet. She said, "Henry, yesterday, Oliver saw a man in a red coat outside the maintenance shed." Henry's face did not change, but his shoulders did. She saw him settle. She saw him get quieter and heavier in his chair, the way a man gets when he is finally, at last, sitting down inside the truth. Yesterday, Kilburn's son sometimes drives him up. Slow. He never stops. He just looks. Except yesterday he stopped. And he stood there. And he looked in my window at my child. And he put his finger to his lips. Henry said nothing. He put his finger to his lips, Henry, to a 5-year-old boy, through my kitchen window. Henry rubbed his hand slowly down his face. He said, "I'll make some calls." Henry. Yes. I need to find R.E. Henry looked at the letters on the table. You want to find her? I want to find her. He nodded. Her name was Ruth Ellison. She was 19 years old that summer. She left Vermont at the end of the season, and she never came back. Last I knew, she lived somewhere outside Burlington. Becca closed her eyes. Ruth Ellison. She opened her eyes. She looked at the little pages in their blue string. She thought about a young woman writing carefully in the dark, planning to burn her own words, after she used them, and never getting the chance to. She said, "Then I need to go to the boathouse." Henry looked at her. The old boathouse, across the north side of the lake. How do you know about the boathouse? Becca smiled, one small sad smile. Because Simon told me. Henry did not ask. He said only, the ice on the North Cove will hold you if you keep to the edge. Don't cross open water. And take a stick to test in front of you as you go. I will. Take Oliver to Ellen Marsh. Ellen Marsh. Sits on the Historical Society board. Lives in a greenhouse 2 blocks off the square. She was in the kitchen at this camp in 1974. She was there, Becca. She'll know things I don't. And her house has a real front door with a real deadbolt and a real telephone. Becca looked at him. You're sending my son to a stranger. I'm sending your son to Ellen. Trust me on that. She looked at Oliver on the rug in the other room, coloring, humming under his breath. She said, okay. Henry stood up. He pulled his cap on. He picked up his keys. At the door, boots half-laced, he stopped. He turned back and looked at her for a long minute. Miss Halloway. Becca. I have been the manager of this camp for 11 years. My father worked here for 9 summers before I was old enough to remember. That is 59 years between the two of us that a Coleman has been walking past cabin 9. Yes, and in 59 years nobody opened it. She waited. You opened it in 12 days. He said it flat. Not a compliment, just a fact. Then he opened the door and went out into the cold. Ellen Marsh answered her door in a knitted cardigan the color of cranberries. She was 71, small, sharp-eyed, silver hair pinned up in a low bun with a wooden clip. She took one look at Oliver on the front step and knelt right down on her aching knees to shake his mittened hand. Well, hello, young sir. I hear tell you like grilled cheese sandwiches. Yes, ma'am. Then you have come to precisely the right house. She looked up at Becca. Their eyes met. Ellen said, Henry called. Becca nodded. Ellen said, You go do what you have to do. Take your time. This little one and I are going to make cookies. Then she straightened up and put a hand on Becca's arm. She squeezed once. She said, 50 years, honey. I've been waiting for somebody to come ask. Becca could not speak. She kissed the top of Oliver's head. She told him she would be back before dark. She drove back up the mountain. She parked at the lodge. She got her boots and her walking stick and she started around the north edge of Lake Loon, following the old service road until it petered out, then following the shoreline through knee-deep snow, testing the ice before every step. Half a mile in, the trees thinned. And there, leaning toward the frozen water with its roof half sagged in, was the old boathouse. Weather gray, cedar shingles, a door that hung crooked on one hinge. Becca stopped at the edge of the trees. She looked at it. She thought about a 19-year-old girl walking down the shoreline in the summer of 1974. In the dark, before dawn, carrying $7 and a bus ticket and hope. She thought about a 10-year-old boy who had promised to meet her there. She stepped forward. The door creaked when she pushed it open. Inside cold, cobweb-thick, old wood and rust, and the faint mineral smell of long frozen water. An overturned rowboat, a workbench, a coil of rope, so old it had gone to gray felt. Becca moved carefully. She stepped past the rowboat. She swept her flashlight along the floorboards under the workbench. There, scratches on the wood. Thin, careful. Somebody had pried a board up here, then set it back down. Becca knelt. She got her fingers under the edge. She lifted. Underneath, in the space between the joists, wrapped in a piece of old canvas gone black with damp, was a small canvas backpack. She knew before she touched it. She lifted it out. She sat back on the cold floor of the boathouse. She unbuckled the flap. 2 shirts, folded neatly, both too small for any hand she knew. Pair of white cotton socks, balled up. A leather wallet, empty except for $7 in old bills. 3 ones, for quarters. A slip of paper with an address in Manchester, New Hampshire. And, at the very bottom, folded twice and tucked into the small inner pocket, a bus ticket. Loon Lake VT, Boston, Massachusetts, Manchester, New Hampshire. July 22, 1974. For 30 a.m. Becca held it up to the light. She turned it over. Written on the back in ink that had faded, but not disappeared, in a young hand that slanted a little to the right. Wait for me at the boathouse. I will get you out before dawn. R.E. Becca sat with that ticket in her lap for a long time. She thought he packed. He packed his little bag. He hid it here. He was going. She thought R.E. came for him, and she left him this, which means R.E. meant every word. She thought he almost made it. She looked at the ticket, at the neat cursive on the back. At the date. She thought for the first time the thing she had not yet let herself think. She thought, maybe he lived. Maybe he got on that bus. Maybe he got to Manchester. Maybe somebody at that address took him in. Maybe he grew up. Maybe he became somebody. Maybe he is out there. Maybe. She was smiling when she carefully put the ticket back into the inner pocket of the backpack. She was still smiling when she stepped out of the boathouse and started back along the shore. She was smiling all the way back up the trail to the lodge. She was smiling right up until she pulled into her own gravel driveway at the caretaker cottage and got out of the car and saw the door of her cottage standing open. Just a little. Just enough. Just enough that the wind was moving it slow back and forth. Becca stood in the snow with the keys in her hand. She thought, I locked that door. She thought, I locked it. I checked it. I checked it twice. She walked up onto the porch. Slow. Careful. She pushed the door the rest of the way open with her fingertips. The cottage was empty. Oliver was safe with Ellen. She knew that. She had known that all afternoon. But her chest still went hard and hot and small at the smell of another person in her house. She walked inside. Nothing was taken. Nothing was even moved, except the kitchen table. The tin box on the kitchen table. Somebody had opened it. The letters had been retied, but not the way she had tied them. The Polaroids had been fanned, then stacked back. 2 of them were missing. The one of Simon at the lake with the man in the red coat behind him, and one other. She could not remember which. The compass was gone. And on the wall above the table, written in one long horizontal line, with a fat piece of black chalk, 6 words. Some stories should die with their tellers. Becca stood in her own kitchen and read that sentence. She read it again. She thought, this is a threat. She thought, this is a man who broke into my house while my child was in this cottage this morning, who has been driving past this cottage in a red coat for 50 years, who put his finger to his lips at a 5-year-old boy through a window. She reached into her coat pocket. Her hand closed around the small brass compass she had, without thinking, dropped into her pocket last night, before Henry arrived, meaning to give it back to Henry and then forgetting. Which was the only reason it was not on the kitchen table. Which was the only reason it had not been taken. She held it in her fist, and she looked at the black chalk on her kitchen wall. She said, out loud to the empty cottage, in a voice she had not heard herself use in almost a decade. No. Just that. No. She walked to her phone. She dialed Henry Coleman. He picked up on the first ring. Becca. Henry. What happened? She looked at the wall. She looked at the words. She said, I need the address of Ridge Manor. Henry did not speak. She said, I need to talk to Robert Kilburn. Henry said, Becca. She said, and Henry, I am not asking your permission. There was a long silence on the line. Then Henry Coleman said quietly, the way a man speaks when he has finally decided which side of a 50-year-old story he is standing on. Then I am coming with you. Becca did not go to Ridge Manor that night, because Henry Coleman had said something to her on the phone that had stopped her cold. He had said, first we get your boy. And that was the end of the argument. She drove down to Ellen Marsh's house in the dark. The porch light was on, warm and yellow. Ellen was standing at the storm door in her cranberry cardigan, watching for the headlights, the way women of a certain age still watch for the people they love to come home. Becca got out of the car. Ellen opened the door. Oliver was inside on the rug in front of the wood stove on his stomach, with a plate of gingerbread men beside him, and a pencil in his hand drawing something. He looked up. He smiled at his mother. He said, Mom, I made Ellen a picture. Becca knelt down and pulled him into her arms and pressed her face into the top of his head. She held him there for a long time, longer than she meant to, because for a few hours today, she had left him alone. Left him with a stranger. Left him in the world. And in those same hours, a man had walked into her cottage and written a threat on her wall. She thought, never again. Never this close again. Ellen was watching her with clear, steady eyes. She said quietly, he can stay with me, tonight and tomorrow and however long you need. Becca started to say no. She started to say she could not ask that. Ellen shook her head. She said, honey, you are not asking. I am telling you. My spare room has a real bed and a night light shaped like a moon, and there is a deadbolt on my front door that my late husband installed in 1986, and I still remember how to load his shotgun even though I have not had cause to in 30 years. Your boy is safe here. You go do what you have to do. Becca looked at her. She said, I don't know how to thank you. Ellen said, 50 years, honey. I told you. I've been waiting for somebody to come ask. Becca crouched down again in front of Oliver. She said, Buggy. Yeah, Mom. I have to go do something for the boy in the green sweater. Some. Yeah. I have to help him. Is he still scared? Becca thought about that. She said, I think he was scared for a very long time, and I think he needs somebody to tell his story out loud so he doesn't have to be scared anymore. Oliver nodded like this made perfect sense. He said, You should do that then. Just like that, 5 years old, on his stomach on Ellen Marsh's rug, with gingerbread crumbs on his chin, giving his mother permission to go do the hard thing. Becca said, I love you, Bug, so much. Oliver said, Be careful. 2 words. From her small son. She kissed him. She stood up. She hugged Ellen. She got in the car. She drove back up the mountain to meet Henry. Henry was waiting in his truck at the lodge. He had a thermos of coffee in the cup holder, and the kind of expression on his face that men wear when they have decided that being afraid is no longer going to be one of their options. He rolled down the window. He said, You slept. She said, No. He said, Get in. She got in. He handed her the thermos. She drank. It was bad coffee. It was very hot. It was exactly the right coffee for the morning she was going to have. He backed the truck around and drove them down the mountain. Ridge Manor was a low brick building on the outskirts of Rutland, 40 minutes from the camp, set back from the road behind a row of naked maples. The parking lot had been salted. The front doors slid open when they walked up. Warm air, the smell of old wood cleaner, and coffee and something vaguely medicinal underneath. The woman at the front desk was younger than either of them. She looked up. Henry said, We're here to see Robert Kilburn. The woman looked at him, then at Becca, then at her computer. She said, Are you family? Henry said, No. She said, Are you on the visitors list? Henry said, No. She said, I'm sorry. He has instructions. Becca leaned forward. She put both hands on the desk. She looked at the young woman. She said, My name is Rebecca Halloway. I am the winter caretaker at Camp Millbrook Ridge. 2 nights ago, somebody broke into my house while my 5-year-old son was inside. They wrote a threat on my kitchen wall. I have not called the sheriff yet, but I am about to. Or you can go tell Mr. Kilburn that I would like 10 minutes of his time first. His choice. The young woman looked at her. The young woman looked at Henry. Henry said mildly, He'll want the 10 minutes. The young woman picked up a phone. She spoke into it quietly. She listened. She hung up. She looked at Becca. She said, Room 14. End of the hall. Robert Kilburn was sitting in a wingback chair by the window, in the winter light, wearing a wool cardigan and a plaid shirt and slippers. He was 84. He was very small. His hair was the color of dirty snow. His hands rested folded on his lap. His eyes, when he looked up at her, were pale blue and clear as glass. There was nothing dulled about them, nothing softened by age. They were the eyes of a man who had spent 50 years running a small kingdom that only he still lived inside. Becca stepped into the room. Henry stayed by the door. Kilburn looked at her. He smiled, just a little. The corner of his mouth. He said, Miss Halloway. His voice was thin, warm, perfectly polite. He said, Please, sit down. She did not sit down. She stood in the middle of the room. She let him look at her. She said, You know my name. He said, I know a great many names. She said, You know my son's name. He said, I know his name. She said, You were in my house. He said, I have not been to Camp Millbrook Ridge in 5 years, Miss Halloway. My son will not drive me anymore. She said, Somebody was in my house, he said. Perhaps. That is very concerning. Have you called the sheriff? She said. You know who was in my house. He smiled again, the same corner of the mouth. He said, I do not, Miss Halloway. She stood there looking at him. She thought, he will not admit anything. She thought, he does not need to. She said, I came to tell you something. Kilburn tilted his head. Slightly. The way a bird tilts its head at a thing it is deciding whether or not to eat. He said, by all means. She said, Simon Whitaker did not run away. Kilburn's face did not change. She said, Simon Whitaker's father was hitting him. His counselor, Ruth Ellison, knew it. She bought him a bus ticket to a family in New Hampshire who would take him. He was supposed to meet her at the boathouse before dawn on July 23, 1974. He never got there. His bag is still there. It was still there when I found it yesterday afternoon. Kilburn was silent. She said, and you know that, because Ellen Marsh went to you the afternoon before. She told you Simon had been asking about the bus, and you brought him back to cabin 9, and you locked the door. Kilburn's fingers moved. Just a little, on his lap, just once. She said, I don't know what happened after that. Not yet, but I am going to. Kilburn breathed in through his nose. Slowly, he said, Miss Halloway, sit down, please. You are standing over an old man in a chair. It is undignified. She did not sit down. He said softly, You have a lovely little boy. She did not move. He said, I looked at his drawings on your refrigerator. He is talented. For his age. She did not breathe. He said, Divorced women, Miss Halloway, do not always keep their custody. Judges look at things. Judges look at stability. Judges look at whether a woman is dragging her son to the woods in Vermont to work as a janitor. Judges look at whether that woman is chasing ghosts. Judges look particularly when the father has resources and a good lawyer. Becca felt everything inside her chest go very cold. She thought about Grant on the phone last week. The same words, different mouth, same weapon. She thought about Ruth Ellison at 19, being told, exactly like this, that if she opened her mouth she would lose her whole life. And she thought about R.E.'s last page. He is 10, and he has marks on his back. And I don't get to be wrong about that. She looked at Robert Kilburn. She looked at his folded hands. She looked at his cardigan. She said, slowly, Mr. Kilburn. Yes. You have been quiet for 50 years. Yes. You thought quiet was power. He did not answer. Quiet, she said, is only fear wearing a nicer coat. She let that sit in the room. She said, I have been afraid for 8 years. I know what it smells like. I recognize it in you. And I am not afraid of you anymore. She stepped closer. She said, You threatened my child. To keep me quiet about somebody else's child. Which tells me you have been doing that in one form or another for 50 years. Which tells me you are not a monster. You are a small man in a chair. And I am going to walk out of this room now. And I am going to keep opening every door in this story. And you are not going to stop me. Kilburn's pale eyes did not move from her face. He said, You will regret this. She said, I have regretted so many things, Mr. Kilburn. I do not think this one will make the list. She turned. She walked out of room 14. Henry followed her. In the hallway she stopped. She put her hand flat against the wall. She breathed in, through her nose, and out through her mouth. Henry stood beside her. Not touching her, just standing. He said, quietly, Becca. She said, Yeah. He said, Your father would have been proud of you. She did not know what to do with that, because she had not thought of her father in a long time. Her father had died when she was 14. Her father had been a soft, quiet mechanic who had never once, in her memory, called her difficult. She said, Thanks, Henry. Then she walked out of Ridge Manor into the winter sun. 2 days later, Henry called her from the maintenance shed. He said, "Becca, come down here." She came down. The shed was cold. Henry had turned on the space heater, but it was still cold. On the workbench in front of him was an old cardboard shoebox. The top was off. The tape had gone brittle. Inside were three things: a brown leather glove, a creased black and white photograph of a young Arthur Coleman in a canvas jacket, standing next to a pickup truck, squinting at the camera, and a small green cloth-bound notebook with a rubber band around it that snapped when Henry touched it. Henry looked at Becca. He said, "I have known this shoebox was here since I was 12 years old. My father kept it on the top shelf of this cabinet. He told me one time," he said, "Henry, when I die, if anybody ever asks you about that boy, take down this box and read the green book, not before." He put his hand on the notebook. He said, "I have not been able to take it down. In 25 years. I could not." Becca said, "Take it down together." He did. They sat on two overturned milk crates in the maintenance shed, with the space heater ticking and the wind in the pines outside. Henry opened the notebook. His father's handwriting was small, sharp, all in dark blue ink, from a leaky fountain pen. The first entry was dated July 22, 1974. "I saw her. K. Take the Whitaker boy back to cabin 9 after supper. He locked the door from the outside. The boy did not cry out. That is not right. A 10-year-old should have cried. He didn't. He knew. I told my wife I would be home late. I went back to the shed. I sat on this crate until 11 at night. Then I went to bed. And I could not sleep, because there is a bruise on that boy that I have seen. When I was fixing the screen on cabin 9 last week, he was changing his shirt. I saw it. I did not know if I should say anything. I did not. I got up at 2:30 this morning. I could not stop thinking about that lock. I took the master key." Henry stopped reading. He looked at Becca. His hands were shaking. Becca said, "Keep going." He turned the page. I opened cabin 9 at 2:45 in the morning. I did not turn on any lights. I used my hand torch downward. Simon was awake. He was sitting up on his bunk, fully dressed, with his little bag beside him. He was not surprised to see me. He said, "Are you the one who is supposed to come?" And I said, "I don't know who is supposed to come, but I am here." He said, "There was a lady counselor. She said before dawn." I said, "I know the lady counselor. I think somebody told on her. I think you can't wait for her." He looked at me a very long time. He was 10 years old, and he looked at me the way a grown man looks at another grown man when he is deciding whether or not to trust him with his life. He said, "Where would I go?" I said, "I have your address. Ruth showed me the address last week. She was going to bring you tonight. I don't think she can now. So I will." He said, "Why?" I did not have a good answer. I said, "Because you deserve for somebody to." He picked up his bag. He picked up a small brass compass off the bunk. He put the compass in my hand. He said, "Keep this for me, in case." I said, "In case what?" He said, "In case I don't get there." Becca had to put her hand over her mouth. Henry did not look up. He kept reading. I drove him down the service road with the headlights off until we hit the county road. Then I drove him east, then south all the way through the night until I got to the house Ruth had written down. In Manchester, New Hampshire. A Reverend Hartley and her husband. Ruth's aunt, I think. Or her father's friend. I don't remember, which she said. I put him on that porch at 7 in the morning. I knocked. Reverend Hartley opened the door in a housecoat. She looked at Simon. She looked at me. She said one word. "Ruth." I said, "Ruth couldn't come." She said, "Come in." I said, "I have to get back before anyone notices I'm gone." She said, "All right." She took Simon by the hand. She turned to bring him inside. And Simon stopped at the door and he turned around and he looked at me. And I said the only thing I could think of to say. I said, "Simon, don't look back." Live a life that would make me feel like I did right by you." Henry stopped. He was crying. He did not lift his hands to his face. He did not wipe his eyes. He just sat on the milk crate in his father's shed and let the tears run down. Becca sat with him. She did not say anything. After a while, Henry turned the last page. "I put the compass under the floor of cabin 9 when I got back. Under the last bunk. I put his letters and the picture I had taken of him at the dock with R.K. in the background because Ruth had asked me to snap that picture in June and I had never given it back. I put my own staff badge in the box. I did not know why. It felt like all of it belonged together. I nailed the board back down loose, so somebody could find it one day if they were looking. I did not tell Ruth. I did not tell my wife. I did not tell my son, because R.K. knew Ruth had planned this. If Ruth spoke, he would have her arrested. If I spoke, he would tell them Ruth and I together took the boy. Ruth was 19 years old. She was going to be a teacher. I could not do that to her. And a small dark part of me is afraid still of what R.K. would do to my own family if he knew where the boy really is. So I will not write it in this notebook. But if you are reading this and you are asking about the boy, then that means I am dead. And the danger to my family has passed. And the danger to R.K. is finally here. Look in Manchester. His name will not be Whitaker anymore. Ask for a boy who arrived on a summer morning in 1974, with a compass in his hand and no words in his mouth. And tell him, from an old maintenance man in Vermont, that he was worth every mile of that drive. Arthur Coleman. Henry closed the notebook. He sat in the shed with his father's handwriting in his lap, and he cried the way men cry when a story they have been carrying, since they were 10 years old finally, at last, sets them down. Becca reached over. She put her hand on top of his. She said, "Henry." He said, "Yeah." She said, "Your father was a good man." Henry said, "I spent 25 years being afraid he wasn't." Becca said, "He knew you would. That's why he made you wait." Henry looked at her. He said, "Why?" She said, "Because he needed you to know one thing for sure by the time you read it." "What?" "That you would have opened cabin 9 too." Henry put his other hand over his face. He cried on the milk crate in the shed, the way a 60-year-old man cries when he finally forgives his father in front of a stranger. Reverend Hartley had died in 1998, her husband 3 years later. Becca called the county records office in Manchester the next morning. She was polite. She was patient. She asked for anything they could tell her about the Hartley family who had lived at that address in the 70s. The clerk called her back 2 hours later. The Hartleys had raised 3 biological children, and one boy who had been listed on the town rolls, starting in the fall of 1974, as foster placement, Simon Hartley, DOB unknown. Simon Hartley. Becca sat down on the porch steps of the caretaker cottage in the cold when she heard the name. The clerk kept talking. She was very kind about it. She said Simon Hartley had graduated from a small high school in Manchester in 1982. He had gone to a state college in New Hampshire. He had become a middle school English teacher. He had married a woman named Grace in 1993. They had 1 daughter. He had retired last spring. He still lived in the same town. Becca said, "Do you have a phone number?" The clerk said, "Honey, I have his address. His phone number I am not allowed to give you, but I can tell you the man is in the phone book." Becca laughed. She could not help it. She laughed on the porch of the caretaker cottage. She said, "Ma'am, God bless you." The clerk said, "Well, now don't you make me cry. I don't know what you're up to, but it sounds like it's a good thing, so you go do it." Becca wrote him a letter, not a phone call, not right away, because she thought, if I had been kept safe and quiet for 50 years, and a woman I had never met dialed my number, I would hang up. But a letter, a woman could write a letter. She wrote it on a legal pad at the kitchen table with Oliver's frog and toad books stacked next to her. "Mr. Hartley, my name is Rebecca Halloway. I am the winter caretaker at a summer camp in Vermont called Millbrook Ridge. I am writing this letter because I found a small brass compass under the floor of a locked cabin 2 weeks ago. On the back of it, someone had scratched 2 initials and 4 words. The initials are yours. The 4 words are "Find your way home." I want you to know first that no one is coming for you. I do not know who wrote them, but I have not told a newspaper or a police station, and I will not. I am writing to you as one adult to another. My son is 5. He is safe. He is asleep in the next room as I write this. 12 days ago he came inside from the yard and told me he had made a friend outside our cottage. A boy in a green sweater who was 10 years old. I do not know what to do with that. I am not writing to explain it. I am only writing to tell you. My son has taught me a great deal this month about believing children when they tell you what they saw. If you would like to write me back, my address is on the envelope. If you would not, that is all right too. I only wanted you to know that 50 years later, in a caretaker's cottage in Vermont, a woman found your compass. And she thought about you, and she was glad you had been out there in the world. Rebecca Halloway. She mailed it the next morning, from the post office in town. 3 days later, her phone rang. The number was from a New Hampshire area code. She answered. She said, "Hello." A man's voice said, "Miss Halloway, this is Simon Hartley." She could not speak. He said, "I got your letter this morning. I have read it 4 times. She said, "I'm sorry. I know this is." He said, "Would you meet me somewhere? In person. My wife thinks I should. I think I would like to." She said, Yes, I would like to." He said, "There is a diner in White River Junction, off Route 5, halfway between us, on Thursday, 2 o'clock. She said, "I'll be there." He said, "Thank you for the letter, Miss Halloway." He said, "It was a very kind letter." He said, "And I would like to see the compass." Then he hung up. Becca sat at her kitchen table with the phone in her lap, and she did not move for a long time. She just sat there, in a cottage in the woods, while a boy in a green sweater she had never met, who was 60 years old now, drove across the state to meet her. The diner in White River Junction had red vinyl booths and coffee cups turned upside down on the table until you were ready. Becca got there 20 minutes early. She brought Oliver, because she had thought about it, and she had asked Oliver, and Oliver had said yes, because it seemed to Becca, in the strange logic of a story that had begun with a boy in a green sweater talking to another boy through a window, that maybe the 2 of them ought to sit at the same table at least once. Simon Hartley walked in at 2 o'clock. He was 60 years old, tall, thin, gray hair swept back from a high forehead, wide-rimmed glasses, a brown wool coat. He carried it over his arm as he walked to the booth. He had the very careful posture of a man who had spent 40 years standing in front of 8th graders. He looked at Becca. He looked at Oliver. Oliver was in the booth in his green puffer coat, kneeling on the seat with a stack of paper napkins he was folding into small triangles. Simon Hartley stopped at the edge of the booth. He said, "Miss Halloway." She said, "Becca, please." He said, "Simon." He looked at Oliver. He said, "And this is." Oliver looked up. He looked at Simon Hartley for a long, serious moment. Then he said, in the totally certain voice of a 5-year-old, who had already made up his mind about something months ago, "Hi, Sam." Simon Hartley did not move. His face did the thing that adult faces do when something they thought they had accepted actually still breaks their heart. He sat down in the booth across from them. He set his coat beside him. He looked at Oliver. He said, quietly, "Hi, buddy." Oliver went back to his napkins. Becca reached into her coat pocket. She set the small brass compass on the formica table between them. Simon Hartley did not pick it up right away. He looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. Then he reached out with 2 fingers and turned it over. He read the 4 words on the back. Then he closed his hand around it and pressed the fist against his mouth. He did not cry, not out loud. He just held the compass against his mouth for a long time. When he took his hand down, he said, "I have not seen this since I was 10 years old." Becca said, "I know." He said, "Arthur told me to keep it, and then he gave it back to me, and then he told me to keep it again in case I didn't get there. And I gave it to him, and he said he would keep it for me." Becca said, "He did. He kept it for 50 years. Simon said, "He drove me all night. Through New Hampshire. 9 hours. He barely spoke. When we got to the Hartleys, he said one thing to me on the porch." She waited. Simon said, "Don't look back. Live a life that would make me feel like I did right by you." He looked out the window at the parking lot. He said, "I have been trying to live that life for 50 years. Becca said, "You did, Simon. You did." He said, "I became a teacher because he said that to me. I did not know it for a long time. I thought I became a teacher because I loved books, but it was because he said that to me. Every time a scared child came into my classroom, I heard him. Every time I thought about giving up on one of them, I heard him." Becca said, "He would be so proud of you." Simon said, "Miss Halloway." Becca, I have to ask you something." "Yes. Please do not tell anyone." She said, "I won't. There are people who would want to write about this. Reporters, podcasts. They would find my daughter. They would find my grandchildren. They would call this house and ask my wife if she knew I used to be somebody else. She knows I was fostered. She does not know the rest. I did not tell her because I did not want her to carry it. And I do not want anyone to make her carry it now." Becca said, "I won't tell anyone. Not a reporter. Not a podcast. Not a newspaper. No one." She said, "I only came here to give you the compass. And so my son could meet you." Simon Hartley looked at Oliver. Oliver was very carefully folding a napkin into a swan. Simon said, "May I ask you something else?" Becca said, "Yes." He said, "Why did you do this? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. You could have closed that cabin back up and gone on with your life." But Becca thought about it. She thought about Grant on the phone. She thought about Kilburn's pale blue eyes. She thought about Ruth Ellison, 19 years old, writing at 4 in the morning in a bunkhouse. She thought about the day her 5-year-old had walked in from the yard and told her something impossible, and she had said, "I believe you." She thought about the 14-year-old girl she used to be, whose father had died, and whose mother had never remarried, and who had once needed one grown-up in the whole world to say to her, "I know you saw what you saw." And how nobody had. She said, "Because I once needed someone to believe me, and nobody did, and I am not able to go back and give that to the girl I was. But I can give it to you, and I can give it to my son, and I can give it, going forward, to whoever else needs it." She reached across the table. She said, "That is all this is, Simon. That is the only reason. I just wanted to be that person one time, for somebody." Simon Hartley looked at her. He looked at her for a long minute. Then he opened his fist. He set the small brass compass on the formica table between them. He pushed it slowly across, toward Oliver. He said, "Buddy." Oliver looked up from the napkins. Simon said, "This belongs to you now. All right." Oliver looked at the compass. He looked at his mother. Becca nodded. Oliver picked up the compass. He held it in his small palm. He turned it over. He looked at the words on the back. He could not read them all yet, but he could read the first word. He said, "Find." Simon smiled. He said, "That's right, buddy. Find." Ruth Ellison flew in from Burlington the following month. Becca drove her down to New Hampshire. They spent one afternoon in Grace Hartley's living room. That was between them, so Becca sat with Grace in the kitchen and drank coffee, and Grace turned out to be a small round woman, with a gray braid and quick warm eyes, who had been told, only that morning, the outline of a story her husband had carried alone for 50 years, and who had said only all right. "Now I know. I love you the same," which was, Becca thought, the correct answer. which was, Becca thought, what love was supposed to sound like. She sat at Grace Hartley's kitchen table. And when Ruth Ellison came out of the living room while later, her face was wet and calm and something in her had unwound. Ruth stopped in the kitchen doorway. She looked at Becca. She said one line. She said, "He forgave me before I asked." Becca said, "That's what he is, Ruth. That's the man Arthur helped him grow into." Ruth crossed the kitchen. She took Becca into a hug. She held her a long time. She said into Becca's hair, "You are the daughter I wish I had been brave enough to have." Robert Kilburn was never charged. The county prosecutor read Arthur's notebook. Then she called the state's attorney. Then the state's attorney called 2 retired judges. The answer came back the same each time. Arthur Coleman was dead. Ruth Ellison had never seen Kilburn take Simon anywhere. Simon Hartley did not want to testify, and the statute had passed decades ago on any charge they might have brought. There would be no arrest. Becca understood, but she wrote out 3 careful pages in her own hand. Everything they had found. Everything Arthur had written down. Everything Ellen remembered. Everything the newspaper had gotten wrong in 1974. She did not name Simon. She said only that a boy had been sent to safety by a man on the maintenance staff, and had lived a good life somewhere far from Vermont, and that the man who had almost prevented that from happening was named Robert Kilburn, and had been the director of Camp Millbrook Ridge and was living at 84 at Ridge Manor. She mailed a copy to the Gazette. She mailed a copy to the Historical Society. She mailed a copy to the sheriff. She mailed a copy to Ellen. She did not mail one to Kilburn, because he did not need one. He already knew. The paper ran a short piece 2 weeks later. Buried on page 7. It did not name Simon. It named Kilburn. That was enough. Nobody drove Robert Kilburn up to Camp Millbrook Ridge that winter for his ritual look at the closed cabins. Nobody drove him at all after that. The women at Ridge Manor stopped bringing his breakfast tray to the sitting room. He took it in his own room instead. He died the following spring. In his sleep. Alone. No one from the town came to his service. Becca did not go either. Spring came slowly to Millbrook Ridge. The snow slid off the cabin roofs in long wet sheets. The ice on Lake Loon cracked open along its middle, and broke and drifted, and finally, one warm morning in April was gone. The Loons came back 3 days later, and their calls carried up the slope to the caretaker cottage exactly the way Henry had told her they would. Henry offered her the year-round property manager job on the 1st of May. Not as charity. He said plainly, sitting on her porch step, "You held this place through the worst winter we've had in 11 years, and you did the one thing I could never make myself do. I am not offering you this job because I feel sorry for you. I am offering it to you because you have earned it." Becca said, "Yes, just that, yes," because it was the first time in 8 years that a man had offered her a thing without asking her to be smaller in exchange. Oliver started kindergarten in the fall. The school was in town, a 15-minute drive down the mountain. Ellen Marsh had introduced Becca to the principal, which was how life worked in a small town in Vermont when you were finally in one. He got on the bus every morning at 7:30. He got off the bus every afternoon at 3:15. He came running up the gravel road to the cottage with his backpack bouncing. Every day. Becca stood on the porch every afternoon and watched him come. She thought every day, I made this. I did this. I brought us here. She hung the small brass compass on a nail above his bed. Sometimes at night, when he was asleep, she would go into his room and stand in the doorway and look at the compass in the small light of the moon coming through his window. And she would think about Simon Hartley in New Hampshire. And she would think about Arthur Coleman in the ground. And she would think about Ruth Ellison, who had started sending Oliver a birthday card every February, always with a $5 bill inside, and a note in her 19-year-old girl handwriting that said, "From a lady who is very glad you exist." When the children came, 300 of them, in wave after wave of laughing station wagon families dropping them off, Becca stood on the porch of the main lodge with Henry Coleman and watched them run down toward the lake. And she looked past all of them at Cabin 9. The boards had come off the windows. The two padlocks had come off the door. Henry had turned it into a nature room. Kids came in and out all day looking at pinned insects and drawing leaves and pressing wildflowers. It was a good, useful, kind of room. But on the last bunk on the frame, for words were still carved into the pine. Deep, careful. Henry had refused to sand them out. He said, "That stays. That is his." He said, "Any child who reads it will know." He said, "Know that they should never have to carve something like that themselves." Because sometimes, Becca thought, standing on the porch of the lodge with the summer sun on her face, sometimes finding your way home is not about going back to where you came from. Sometimes it is about arriving somewhere you did not know existed. Somewhere no one is going to tell you you are imagining things. Somewhere the doors that need to open. Somewhere a child who tells you he saw a boy in a green sweater will be believed. She looked down at the shore. Oliver had reached the water. He was standing at the edge of Lake Loon in his bathing suit, laughing at something one of the counselors had said, with his small hand up over his eyes against the sun. He turned. He looked up at his mother on the porch. He waved. Becca waved back. She thought, home. She thought, this is home. And if you have ever had to begin again, later than you planned, after a divorce or a loss or a life that fell apart in your hands, then maybe you already know what I am saying. There is no age at which hope stops being yours.